Good morning, folks. This is Tom Lear coming to you from South Mississippi, about 70 miles north of the big town of New Orleans. Big Easy. Let the good times roll. Les bon temps rouler. Today, my topic is going to be the Indians of America and how they affected our form of government that we know today, specifically the Constitution of the United States of America. The Indians originally called where we live the earth, the globe, Turtle Island. Turtle Island. I have a lot of turtles out in my pond. There was a reason that they called it Turtle Island, but I'll let you guys research that. They believed in animism. That's the belief that all things have a spirit. They had great respect for the land. Legend goes that hundreds of years ago, the great peacemaker in Hiawatha got all the tribes together to form a confederacy to get along. And it was called the Iroquois Confederacy. And those were mostly tribes east of the Mississippi. And one thing I'll throw in, if you think about it, think about how many of our states have Indian names. Mississippi's one of them. Rivers, the Ohio. I lived in Kentucky. Kentucky's an Indian name. Monongahela runs through there. Missouri. Many states are. Alabama. Those are Indian names, Indian tribes. We still have that effect on us today. Anyhow, they formed this confederacy. And before we became a United States, the founding fathers had come in contact with the with Indians. So they were kind of picking their brains on many things. And a chief who was the spokesman for the Iroquois Conference gave a speech in 1744. He recommended that the colonies emulate the Iroquois form of a confederacy. And during this time period, the French and other Indians, other Indian tribes were fomenting war. And so it was a form of protection also. So what happened? In 1754, Ben Franklin proposed the Albany plan to create a unified government based on the Great Law of Peace. And so Conestoga, the chief spokesman, gave a speech, and he went up in front of them, and he gave them an arrow. This is what the I forget the word I want to use. Legend. And he gave them one arrow. Then he immediately drew it back from them, and he broke it. And he said, then he gave them 13 arrows. Then he grabbed those back. He couldn't break them. And that's what he was trying to tell them, that you're stronger together. You can't be broken. See, a house together is, you can't divide it, or I forget that saying, but that's what he was telling them. And if you look at our great seal of the United States, there is an eagle, and in his talon he has 13 arrows. That's where that came from. So they when they had the next delegation, they had a speech that says, "Brothers and sisters of the 6 nations, Delawares and Shawnee, we, the delegates of the 13 United States of America, are extremely pleased to see you. we take you by the hand and bid you welcome to our great council fire. So in December 1776, they had one constitutional convention. December 1777, they had another. But when they were putting these together, they locked the Indians up on the second floor where they were writing this. And then they would go up and ask them, well, what about this? What about that? And the Indians would give them counsel. But they didn't let them out until they got what they wanted written. So some of the similarities between the Indians' Confederacy, their great law, and ours are, one, theirs restricts members from holding more than one office in the Confederacy. And in our Constitution, Article 1, Section 6 says that they're ineligible for members of the executive or judicial branch to serve in the Senate or House. You can't serve in two. Theirs outlines a process to remove leaders from the Confederacy for treasons of high crimes from the Confederacy. We have the impeachment clause for treasons of high crime, for treason, high crime, bribery. Theirs designated two branches for passing laws. We have the Senate and the House. They had one on who can declare war. We have the War Powers Clause. They had one to create a balance of power between the Confederacy and other tribes. We have the three branches: executive, judicial, and legislative, to separate for the balance of power. So anyhow, we eventually wrote our Constitution, the plan of the Union, and the Congress finally passed, I believe it was in the 1980s, something that they put on record about thanking the Indians for their contribution. You can look that up, to our government. So basically, our government in many aspects was set on the Indians' form of government and their council. Clause 3 says that Congress shall have power to regulate commerce with foreign nations and among several states and with the Indian tribes. See, they still hadn't, Indians weren't citizens then. Neither were blacks. Ladies didn't have they basically weren't citizens because they didn't have a voice in voting. So what happened during this time, Washington wanted to acquire land by buying it from the Indians. Well, they didn't want to sell it. So what happened, him and some other governors, owners of land, they put a bounty out on Indians for their scalps. See, somebody said that's where the term red man came from, because of the blood on the scalp. And I'm saying that about Washington because we say and we believe that our country was founded upon Christian principles. Okay. Also because they did an interview with a Lakota Indian. He was talking about the faces that were on Mount Rushmore, the 4 presidents, and he kind of gave a little synopsis about each one and what effect they had on the Indians when So I thought that was pretty interesting. But the reason I got interested in the Indians, I was interested in their spirituality. And they do believe in something called animism. And that's that every thing has life in it, spirit. And think about this. If you believe in the Bible and the Christian concept of the Bible, and it says that you're formed of the dirt of the ground or whatever, you're going back to the dust. If 95% of your body, if you're a scientific type person, is made of water, if the same DNA that's in you can find in trees and other living things, and if God said to dress the earth, and then He put us in charge of making things right with the animals and everything. I mean, is there some type of connection, or is that just too fairy tale for some of us? I'm just talking here. Don't get upset. One thing the Indians said: when the blood of your veins returns to the sea and the earth, and your bones returns to the ground, then you will remember this land does not belong to you. It is you who belong to the land. And folks, I mean, from dust to dust, that kind of makes sense to me. That's just me talking. Lincoln, they called him the great, whatever they called him. He instituted the largest mass hanging in history of 38 Dakota Indians. I guess there was a little uprising. I believe it was when Minnesota was becoming a land, a state, and our government was stealing the land from them. Originally, they got 500 of them for this insurrection. They didn't kill them. They only hung 38. And this is during a time of the Civil War. And they didn't even do that to the white Confederate soldiers. So that's not in your history book either. Jefferson, his face is up on the Mount Rushmore. He was probably the nicest of all four of those guys. But he broke treaties with the Cherokees. He believed in relocating and forced removal. And I don't know if who was the one that talking about manifest destiny? That may have been him. But I know Jackson, wasn't he responsible for that Trail of Tears where they just took all the Indians and moved them west? See, and we were founded upon Christian principles. Killing of all the buffalo, that was to starve the Indians out. See, 1902, Roosevelt, the first thing he did when he became president, he opened up thousands of acres of the treaty-protected Rosebud Sioux Reservation for white settlement. Roosevelt wanted to see the Indians disappear. He said at one time that I don't go as far as to think that the only good Indians are the dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of 10 are, and I shouldn't like to inquire too closely in the case of the 10th. Roosevelt's Commissioner of Indian Affairs put out a letter sending it to all the tribes, the people in charge of the tribes, the men, telling them they needed to cut their hair. Indians, they weren't considered citizens in all the states or given voting rights. until 1926. But still, up until that time, it was for the state to decide, like they did with the black people, the African Americans. They wouldn't let them vote either, even though they had their rights. So in 1962, Utah was the last state to decide, so they could finally, everybody could finally get in the mix to vote. They were considered savages. See, they weren't even considered people, even though they had, we had based our Constitution on things that they had given us. We were always taught growing up. Remember cowboys and Indians? I lived in Nevada for 3 or 4 years. They had the Washoe tribe out there, some more tribes. That's why I got this hat. I used to play in a country western band. This was 30-something years ago, and it wasn't Wild West out there, but people still wore cowboy boots. The Indians from the reservation would come and hear us play and dance, and it's a lot different now. We lived in what they called Washoe Valley. It was beautiful out there, mountains on the side, and a little lake. We could see the eagles out there. You could see coyotes. There was everything out there, man. It was nice. But I don't know how I got off on that. Oh, reservations. I've seen reservations. When I was in the military, we did exercises down in Tucson. We would go drive through an area where reservations were. When I was 17, I'd hitchhiked across the United States a couple of times, and I was coming back from, I think, Oregon, and that's another Indian name. But anyhow, I was coming back through, and a couple of Indians picked me up in an old pickup truck. And when I was getting out, and I don't even remember us saying one word to each other, really. The older Indian man gave me an old paper bag about maybe this tall, full of peyote buttons. They use that in their ceremonies. They don't go around eating it every day. And from what I studied on it, it's a very light mixture of the crushed up peyote that they use. See, they're not walking around stoned all the time. The only thing they're stoned on is what the white man brought, is the alcohol. Screwed them up royally. But anyhow, I took it home, and I didn't know you were supposed to dry it and wash it and all that stuff. So that's back when I was, experimenting with a few things. Anyhow, that's another story. But as far as reservations, they started opening reservation schools to try to make the Indians more white. They took the Indians from their parents, and sometimes the parents took the little kids to the school, because it was kind of like they couldn't get supplies unless they turned the kids over to these authorities, which a lot of the schools were run by either the Catholics or another group of people, and the kids were treated bad there. Not all of them, but this is even up in Canada too. Just look it up, reservation schools, and they made them get their hair cut. They would beat them if they talked their own language. They made them eat things that were foreign to them. They were trying to make them white, is what the plan was. And one Indian girl says the only time they ever cut their hair when they were back where they lived is if someone died. Well, here they were, just whacking it off, back even in Geronimo's time, when they were trying to do the certain dances and stuff in their religious ceremonies, many of them were killed. Remember that little story? Anything out of the norm. See, they were killing a culture, the white man, because maybe the white man doesn't have a culture, and that's sad. That is sad. So anyhow, now we have what they call Indigenous People Day, and I understand that the true Indians don't like that name, indigenous, but it was October 2nd. It used to be called Columbus Day. Remember old Trump got up there and I guess he was appeasing his right-wing buddies. He said, I'll always remember it as Columbus Day. Who cares what you remember, if anything? If you study Columbus, he was probably one of the biggest killers that there were. And the Catholics actually have a group called Knights of Columbus. So if they were really to study Columbus, what he did, who was that guy, Amerigo Vespucci? That's who they named the Americas after, apparently. Trump called Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. Study Pocahontas sometimes and really see what went on with that. That's pretty bad for him calling her that. But that's he also opened up the Bears Ear Monument. It was a protected site. He allowed 200,000 acres opened up for oil and gas exploration. He reversed Obama legislation on protecting land for the North Dakota, that pipeline they wanted to run across the land. And on further study, that joker had, he had invested in some companies that were responsible for doing that. Well, the Indians raised hell. They didn't want that crap across their land. And so then Trump retaliated, said, well, we better check you all out about voting suppression. He was suppressing their vote, wanted their votes suppressed because he said they didn't have correct addresses. Well, hell, they've been voting for forever. Now all of a sudden he didn't get his, our great Constitution. The wall that's built, it's built over Indian burial grounds. They removed trashed Indian burial grounds to build that wall. Washington, D.C., that was Algonquin tribal property. He didn't do anything with that, but it's said that some of the buildings that are built there are built over Indian burial grounds. See, a lot of people say, what does it matter? Who cares? Let's just move on with our time. Let's just, all that stuff's in the past. Folks, we're reaping what we're sowing. We can't stay on this path of destruction. That's what I call it, Remember that song, Eve of Destruction? And I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just telling you the facts of life here. The Indians also said, we will be known forever by the tracks we leave. See, we will be known forever by the tracks we leave. Everybody leaves a track. The frog does not drink up the pond in which he lives. And folks, that's pretty much what we as a society have done. And now we are seeing the effects of that. We can't keep on this thing forever. We have to, the Bible said that God told Adam and them to dress the land, to make it better. See, well, if we were a Christian nation, blah, 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 we've done the total opposite of that. See, the total opposite. We missed the boat, folks. And I'm going to close. I've been watching this, was it Phil Robinson? And he's the duck commander from Louisiana. Anyhow, he's the one that talks against gays and anything that he is. I figured if you're talking about gays so much, you might be in the closet yourself now. You know, you got to have someone to point out against, a group to hate. Whether it's the Indians, cowboys and Indians, let's shoot the Indians, or the Japanese, Chinese, blacks. Let's make fun of somebody. Let's lord it over them, folks. We're all on this boat together. The good ship Lollipop. We're all in this. You don't put a hole in the bottom of the boat, folks. Let's stop putting the holes in the bottom and start patching up the boat. Let's stop hating each other. I don't give a damn if you're a Republican or a Democrat. You're a Catholic or Protestant. That's the fight right there. You're not exactly like me. Who in the hell wants to be exactly like me? What a boring. I like diversity. God. Whatever happened to that? Okay, the Indians helped us. Yeah, I can acknowledge that. They've done a lot for us. A lot of different people that weren't white that actually had a culture have done things for us. For the whole country. I'm not just saying us. I'm just saying we need to acknowledge that. So, really, that was my intent today. Like I said, Mr. Phil, he found out he had a daughter after 45 years. I think he's been married for 58, 57, I don't know how long. Surprise, surprise. He did a video on STDs, sexually transmitted disease. I guess he didn't practice what he preached on that one. What else? Oh, EPA. He thinks EPA is snowflake fairy tale, which surprises me, because if he's such a man of the swamp and bayous, then he should know how the land that is getting demolished daily, from the oil companies and everything else. See, that was the Houma Indians were down there in that part of Mississippi. See, they went through the same thing. My father-in-law lived down there. They wouldn't let the Indians speak their language. They couldn't vote. See, the Choctaw Indians were around here. But what I'm saying, I'm curious as to why Phil slammed the EPA when and they don't do a good job of it. But they, Trump's lifting all these regulations. But they did try to do things about the water, the air, and all that. And if it's all interrelated, folks, what is wrong with that? Even if it costs these companies X amount of dollars to do things right, folks, they've got the money to do that. I'm not crying for them. I'm crying for the dude out here still making minimum wage, which hadn't been raised for 10 or 12 years. Mississippi, they had to have the federal government make them have a minimum wage. See? Folks, we got to start treating each other right in this world right. So I don't know how I got off on all that, but just think about that. And when we're in this COVID-19 lockdown, when we're watching the news of our country getting shredded because our system is messed up. If they were to show me on the video killing somebody, my ass would have been in jail ASAP. So I can understand why they're doing what they're doing. It's like a steam kettle. The pressure's got to go sometimes. And I pray that these police that did it, and even in these other cases, that they hurry up and do something, because if they don't, it's just going to get worse, folks. It's going to get worse. And our system needs a major overhauling from the top to the bottom. Drain the swamp completely, starting with the tweeter-in-chief up there. See, the tweeter-in-chief. And let's bring this country back to maybe common sense and what it was founded upon. Taking care of the land, taking care of each other. Hell, there's no big sin in that. You're not, the Indians, I'll leave you with this. As far as their religion, I actually got interested in their spirituality. I was studying the Hopi Indians, H-O-P-I, and they, Hopi means peace, peaceful people. But anyhow, one of the Lakota Indians said, your concept of heaven doesn't appeal to us. You say you have streets paved with gold. That doesn't interest us. We're not interested in these material things. What good will that do? And if whether it's figurative or literal, that there's going to be gold up there, that kind of makes sense to me. I never thought of that, of their thinking. Their thinking is not like our materialistic thinking, is what I'm trying to tell you. So anyhow, just remember that the Iroquois Federation is and what all the Indians have done for the United States as a nation, as a country. And y'all have a great day.